Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and this is going to be a brief little review for Maoyuu Maou Yuusha, Episode 10. For some reason, going into this episode, I was critically aware of and still feeling the hiatus from last week, for what turned out to be a recap mini-sode or some such called 9.5. And I came to find it interesting in that there wasn't so much of a gap going into this episode from where we left off, with older sister Maid having given her speech while wearing the guise of Mao and such, as there usually is every episode. However, while there wasn't as much of a gap in the episode's open per se, jumps in time did seem to exist at the center of the episode, relating to the plans of the merchant, or head trader as I've previously referred to him, to do heavily with the economics and taxation surrounding wheat and other grains. And largely it seemed to me that this episode was about repercussions. Repercussions in the wake of older sister's speech having given rise to serfs seeking to rebel against their lives of servitude and seeming slavery, as well as the repercussions in wheat pricing and the costs of other related agricultural necessities going through the roof and ultimately pushing Hiro to face an oncoming war. It's still hard for me to read exactly what the merchant's intentions are in spurring on this financial meltdown of sorts, and Hiro truly seemed at first to be spread too thin to comprehend the scope of everything that was going on around him, with which I can somewhat relate as well, being a viewer. But by the end, he seemed to have moved past his pleading questions of where Mao was and why she had to be away at a time like this, and came up with a plan of his own that, at least for all intents and purposes, seems to revolve around cleverly utilizing the winter weather to buy enough time to assure Mao's safe return before things get too hectic. It was awesome, too, to see that older sister hasn't fallen back in on herself, or reverted, as it were, after her momentous speech to the people. She isn't afraid to speak up anymore, and a few times herein voices alternative viewpoints as well as plans of action in dealing with their current predicaments. In effect, she's found her voice and is continuing to grow into it. With what I think is only 2 episodes left, it's hard to say for certain if we'll see this come to any sort of fruition, but it's heartening to know that if she sticks to this path, she could find herself becoming a person of great influence and renown at some point down the line. I was also somewhat intrigued by the daringness that was on display in the building of a church that was set apart from the main overpowering one, the one that, if it has its way, will continue to revel in wealth and prosperity at the expense of the people. This new church going so far as to proclaim itself the true church of the light spirit. It's a great and albeit cursory commentary on religions as we know them in our world. It would be fair to say that the majority of all religions originate with some base similarities in concepts and ideals, yet through the course of history they've all come to evolve into their own distinct interpretations of these values and belief systems. In the same way that a future space explorer might encounter a new world that is similar to ours, yet on the verge of its own sort of renaissance along these lines, this series proves to be equally fascinating, because I can only wonder what this fictional world will look like in another 500 of their years, from the lessons in farming to the invention of the printing press, which seemed to affect a lot of the merchant's actions when he came upon the printed pamphlets that were going around. It would be amazing to see what takes shape as a result, as it so closely mirrors our own history in a lot of ways. We learned too in this episode that the Azure demons, those with blue skin, much like the one we saw receiving a vision of Mao in a previous episode, are possibly working with or having meetings with at least humans in Gate City. No doubt, seeing as how the Dragon Princess describes them as being the demons most consumed with conquering the humans, this doesn't bode well for everyone all around, and perhaps it is this that actually leads her to go and seek out the merchant, which too seems to affect him in that he calls back on some of Hiro's words and seems convinced that he and the Dragon Princess must become better acquainted with each other. Somewhat of a curious interpretation of Hiro's words, I have to say. Equally was I left ultimately curious about the brief sort of sidestep flashback at Mao, who was only just planning to undertake her original journey that led her to become the Demon King. It was cute and hilarious as she and Headmaid were looking, I don't know, a little bit more girly teenager-ish, for lack of a better term, and it once again calls into question for me what exactly it all means. Did Mao just wake up one day and decide to be the Demon King, which basically would suggest ultimately that any demon who desires desired it could have done as well? I really don't know. And it could be the reason that we see this flashback relating to Mao's being all consumed with her future destiny with the hero, being in such close proximity to this meeting between the merchant and the dragon princess, being indicative of the fact that perhaps he now feels he's tapped into a similar vision of his own future relating to a relationship with the dragon princess. But it was interesting to see that, whatever the case, what secured in her desire to fulfill such an obligation related back to the vision of the then baby hero, knowing their destinies, if her desires came to fruition, would one day intertwine. She went into it willfully aware that her body would be altered in some ways, and it didn't really matter nearly as much as the future she envisioned. And so I'm left eager to see how much closer to their mutual goals they'll have managed to bring themselves when finally she returns, if she returns successfully from recertifying herself as the Demon King. And so I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of this episode if you've seen it. Do you think Hero and Winter King will be able to buy time enough to keep them ultimately on their path to glory? And otherwise, that'll be it from me on this one. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.